The sound of the river at night had become the rhythm of Ethan Vance's heartbeat, constant and dangerous and impossibly necessary. He stood on the western bank in the darkness of an Arizona summer in 1882, the Colorado River rushing between him and everything he wanted most in this world. On the far side, past the cottonwoods and the rocky shore, past the dusty trail that wound up through the scrub brush and mesquite, stood the Vaughn ranch house where Catherine slept. Or perhaps she was awake too, listening for the splash of his horse entering the water, counting the minutes until he appeared at her window like he had every night for the past 2 months. Her father had made his position clear. Thomas Vaughn owned half of Oatman, Arizona, and he did not intend for his only daughter to waste herself on a drifter cowboy with nothing but a horse and a worn saddle to his name. The old man had looked Ethan dead in the eye 3 months ago and said if he ever caught him on the eastern side of that river, he would shoot him where he stood and let the coyotes clean up the mess. Ethan had believed him. Thomas Vaughn was not a man given to empty threats. He had carved his empire out of unforgiving desert land through sheer stubborn will and a willingness to do whatever it took. He had buried his wife 5 years back and raised Catherine alone, teaching her to ride and rope and shoot better than most men. But he had also kept her close, watched her like a hawk, and made it known that any man who came calling needed to have land, money, and prospects. Ethan had none of those things. What he did have was a way with horses that made him valuable to the ranches around Oatman, and a face that Catherine Vaughn had looked at one day in town and decided she could not stop thinking about. He had been breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang outside the livery when she had walked past with her basket of supplies. Their eyes had met, and something had shifted in the world. Now his gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Ranger, stood beside him in the darkness, waiting patiently as he had every night. The animal knew the routine. They would cross at the shallowest point, where the current ran swift but not deadly, and emerge on the eastern bank with water streaming from their legs. Then the careful ride up to the ranch, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the main house where Thomas slept with his rifle always within reach. Ethan checked the stars. Past midnight. The ranch hands would be asleep in the bunkhouse, and Thomas would have finished his evening whiskey and taken to his bed. It was as safe as it would ever be, which was not very safe at all. He swung up into the saddle and guided Ranger into the water. The shock of cold was immediate even in summer, the river fed by mountain snowmelt hundreds of miles north. The current pushed against them, insistent and powerful, but Ranger was strong and sure-footed. They had made this crossing so many times now that the horse barely needed guidance. Halfway across, with water up to Ethan's boots and the saddle creaking beneath him, he thought about what he was risking. His life, certainly. Thomas Vaughn was not a man to cross, and Ethan crossed him every single night. But the alternative was never seeing Catherine again, never hearing her laugh or feeling her hand in his, or watching the way her eyes lit up when he appeared at her window. That was not really an alternative at all. They reached the far bank, and Ranger scrambled up onto dry ground, shaking water from his mane. Ethan dismounted and led the horse quietly through the cottonwoods, following the path he had memorized in the darkness. Every rock, every low branch, every patch of loose gravel that might give him away. He moved like a ghost, and Ranger followed just as silently. The ranch house loomed ahead, a sprawling adobe structure with a tile roof and thick walls that kept out the brutal Arizona heat. Most of the windows were dark, but one on the second floor showed the faint glow of lamplight behind closed curtains. Catherine's room. Ethan tied Ranger to a mesquite tree behind the house, well out of sight from any windows. Then he picked up a handful of small pebbles and positioned himself below Catherine's window. He tossed one gently at the glass. The curtain moved almost immediately. She had been waiting. The window slid open and Catherine leaned out, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pinned up the way she wore it during the day. Even in the dim light, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You are completely insane," she whispered down at him, but she was smiling. "I know," he whispered back. "Are you coming down?" She disappeared from the window. A few minutes later, the back door of the house opened silently and she slipped out into the night. She wore a simple cotton dress and boots, and she moved across the yard with the practiced quiet of someone who had been sneaking out for months. When she reached him, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a drowning man finding air. She kissed him back with equal hunger, her hands tangling in his still damp hair. "You are soaked," she murmured against his mouth. "River," he said, kissing her again. "I hate that you have to cross it every night. I hate that he has driven you away like this. Your father loves you. He wants what is best for you, and he has decided that is not you." There was frustration in her voice and sadness. "Ethan, we cannot keep doing this forever. Eventually he will catch you. Eventually something will go wrong, I know. So what do we do?" He had been thinking about this question for weeks, turning it over in his mind during the long days working horses, during the dangerous river crossings, during the stolen moments with Catherine in the darkness. There was only one answer, and it terrified him. "We leave," he said. "We go somewhere your father cannot reach us, somewhere we can build a life together." Catherine pulled back to look at him. "You mean run away, elope?" "I mean stop hiding. Stop sneaking around like criminals. I want to marry you, Catherine. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to build you a home and give you a life. But I cannot do that here, not with your father between us. He will come after us. You know he will. Then we go far enough that he cannot find us, or we go somewhere he has no power. California, maybe, or north to Wyoming. Somewhere we can start fresh." She was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting over his heart. He could feel it pounding beneath her palm, could see the thoughts racing behind her eyes. "I am afraid," she finally said. "So am I, but I am more afraid of losing you. I am more afraid of spending the rest of my life on the wrong side of that river, watching from a distance while your father marries you off to some rancher with land and cattle and everything I do not have. I would never marry someone else. I would rather die an old maid. Your father would not allow that either. He wants grandchildren. He wants someone to leave his empire to, and he will find someone he deems suitable, and he will push and push until you give in." Catherine shook her head fiercely. "I will never give in. I do not care what he wants. I love you, Ethan Vance. I have loved you since the day I saw you with that wild horse, all patience and gentle hands and quiet strength. I am not giving that up for anyone. Then come with me. We will leave in 3 days. That gives me time to get some supplies together to plan a route. We will head west to California, find work there. I can break horses anywhere, and I can do anything," she interrupted. "I am not some delicate flower who needs protecting. I can ride, I can shoot, I can work as hard as any man if I need to." He smiled. "I know you can. So in 3 days. Can you be ready?" "I can be ready in 3 hours if you wanted. But 3 days is smarter. I will need to gather some things, some clothes and supplies. Money, if I can get to my mother's jewelry without my father noticing. We will need every dollar we can scrape together. Meet me here at midnight in 3 days. Bring only what you can carry on a horse. We will ride hard and fast, put as much distance between us and Oatman as we can before your father realizes you are gone." Catherine reached up and cupped his face in her hands. 3 days, and then we are free." They spent the next hour together in the shadows of the ranch, talking in whispers about the future they would build. Catherine spoke about a little house with a garden, about horses in a corral, and the kind of peaceful life she had never known under her father's iron control. Ethan spoke about waking up without fear, about making an honest living and building something that belonged to them alone. When the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Ethan knew he had to leave. They kissed one more time, long and deep and full of promise, and then Catherine slipped back into the house as silently as she had left it. Ethan made his way back to Ranger and rowed down to the river. The water was even colder in the pre-dawn darkness, and the current seemed stronger, as if the river knew what he was planning and wanted to drag him under. But Ranger pushed through, and they emerged on the western bank just as the sun broke over the horizon. He rowed back to the small room he rented above the livery in Oatman, his mind already working through everything he would need. Food, water, ammunition, a second horse if he could afford it, blankets and a tent, a map, though he had traveled enough to know the general direction. Money, which he had precious little of, but he had been saving every cent from his horse work for months now. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan worked his regular jobs, breaking horses for the various ranches around Oatman, but his mind was always elsewhere. He bought supplies carefully, spreading his purchases across different stores so no one would notice and wonder why a drifter cowboy was stocking up for a long journey. He did not cross the river those 3 nights. It was too risky, too close to their planned escape. Catherine would understand. They had agreed that he would stay away, would not risk her father's suspicion falling on him at this crucial moment. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Ethan was working with a particularly difficult mare in the corral behind the livery, when he noticed Thomas Vaughn riding into town. The older man sat tall in his saddle, his gray hair visible beneath his hat, his face weathered and hard from decades in the Arizona sun. He rode straight to the general store and dismounted, tying his horse to the rail. Ethan's heart kicked up its pace. Was this just a normal trip to town, or had Thomas somehow discovered their plan? There was no way he could know. Catherine had been careful, and Ethan had not breathed a word to anyone. He forced himself to focus on the mare, talking to her in the low, soothing voice that seemed to work magic on even the most skittish animals. The horse gradually calmed under his hands, her ears flicking forward instead of back, her breathing settling into an easier rhythm. When Thomas emerged from the general store an hour later, he paused on the boardwalk and looked directly at Ethan. Their eyes met across the dusty street. The older man's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that made Ethan's stomach tighten. Then Thomas mounted his horse and rode out of town without a word. That night, Ethan barely slept. He lay on his narrow bed above the livery, listening to the horses moving in their stalls below, watching the stars through his window and counting the hours until midnight. His saddlebags were packed and ready. His rifle was cleaned and loaded. Ranger was fed and rested and ready for the long ride ahead. At 11 o'clock, he rose and dressed in the darkness. He strapped on his gun belt, shouldered his saddlebags, and picked up his rifle. Downstairs, he saddled Ranger with practiced efficiency, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The ride to the river seemed to take forever. Every shadow looked like a threat, every sound like someone following. But the night remained quiet except for the usual chorus of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. At the river's edge, Ethan paused. This would be the last time he made this crossing in secret, the last time he risked his life for stolen moments. After tonight, Catherine would be beside him, and they would face whatever came together. Ranger entered the water without hesitation, and they crossed through the darkness. On the eastern bank, Ethan urged the horse into a faster pace. They had to reach the ranch, collect Catherine, and be miles away before Thomas woke and discovered his daughter missing. The ranch house appeared through the trees, dark and silent. Ethan's pulse quickened as he approached the back of the house, looking up at Catherine's window. It was dark, the curtains drawn. She was ready. He dismounted and moved to the back door, tapping lightly. It opened immediately, and Catherine stepped out. She carried a small leather bag and wore riding clothes, her hair braided back. In the starlight, she looked determined and beautiful and ready for anything. "Let us go," she whispered. They moved quickly to where Ranger waited. Ethan secured Catherine's bag to the saddle, then helped her mount. He swung up behind her, reaching around to gather the reins. With Catherine in front of him, they would both ride Ranger until they could safely stop and get Catherine her own horse. He turned Ranger toward the river, but before they had gone 10 feet, a voice cut through the darkness. "Catherine." They both froze. Thomas Vaughn stood at the corner of the house, his rifle in his hands, not pointed at them but held ready. His face was hard in the shadows. "Papa," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the tension Ethan could feel in her body. "Get down from that horse." "No, Catherine, I am not asking." "Get down from that horse and go inside. We will discuss this in the morning." "There is nothing to discuss. I am leaving, Papa. I am going with Ethan and we are going to build a life together. You cannot stop me." Thomas's jaw tightened. "That drifter has nothing to offer you. No land, no money, no future. He has been sneaking onto my property like a thief for months, and now he thinks he can steal my daughter in the night." "I am not property to be stolen," Catherine said, her voice sharp. "I am a grown woman and I am choosing my own life. I love him, Papa. I love him, and I am going with him whether you approve or not." "Love," Thomas spat the word like a curse. "Love does not put food on the table. Love does not keep you safe when the money runs out and the hard times come. You think you will be happy living in some shack, scraping by on whatever pennies he earns breaking horses. I would rather live in a shack with a man I love than in a mansion with someone I do not," Catherine shot back. Ethan had remained silent through this exchange, but now he spoke. "Mr. Vaughn, I know I am not what you wanted for Catherine. I know I do not have land or money or any of the things you think are important, but I love your daughter more than my own life. I will work every day to give her the best life I can. I will protect her and provide for her and make her happy. That is all I can promise you, but I promise it with everything I am." Thomas looked at him for a long moment. "You have been crossing my river every night for months, sneaking around behind my back like a coward." "Yes, sir." "Because it was the only way to see her. You made it clear I was not welcome." "Damn right you are not welcome. You think I did not know? You think I did not hear the horses at night, did not notice my daughter smiling to herself like she had a secret? I have been watching you, boy. Watching and waiting to see what you would do." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Then why did you not stop me?" "Because I wanted to see if you were serious. I wanted to see if you would give up when it got hard, when the risk got too high. Most men would have run at the first threat. Most men would have decided she was not worth dying for." Thomas shifted his weight and his rifle moved slightly. "But you kept coming back. Every night risking your neck to cross that river, risking my bullet to see my daughter." "I would risk anything for her," Ethan said quietly. Catherine twisted in the saddle to look at her father. "Papa, please, do not make this harder than it has to be. Just let us go. Let us leave and build our own life. You do not have to approve, you do not have to help us, just let us go." Thomas was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You look so much like your mother. Same stubborn streak, same fire in your eyes when you have made up your mind about something. I could never talk her out of anything once she decided, and I can see I cannot talk you out of this either." "No, you cannot. He really means that much to you, enough to leave everything behind." "He means everything to me, Papa. I am sorry if that hurts you, but it is the truth." Another long silence. Then Thomas lowered his rifle and let out a heavy sigh. "California is probably your best choice. Land is cheaper there, and there is always work for a man who knows horses. I have a friend in Sacramento, runs a ranch outside the city. I will write you a letter of introduction. It is not much, but it might help you get started." Ethan stared at the older man in shock. "Sir, do not make me repeat myself, boy. You are still a fool for thinking you can provide for my daughter on a cowboy's wages, but apparently she has decided you are her fool. I cannot fight you both." He looked at Catherine, and his expression softened just slightly. "But if you hurt her, if you fail to take care of her the way she deserves, I will find you. California is not that far." "I understand, sir, and thank you." "Do not thank me yet. You have no idea how hard it is going to be, but I suppose you will learn." Thomas walked back to the house, then paused at the door. "There is money hidden in the barn in a box under the loose floorboard in the tack room. Take it. Consider it a wedding gift, since I will not be there to see you married." "Papa," Catherine's voice broke slightly. "Go on, get out of here before I change my mind. And Catherine, write to me when you are settled. Let me know you are safe." "I will. I promise." Thomas disappeared into the house without another word. Ethan sat frozen for a moment, unable to quite believe what had just happened. Then Catherine twisted in the saddle and kissed him, tears streaming down her face. "He let us go," she whispered against his lips. "I cannot believe it. Neither can I. But we should take his advice and get moving before he does change his mind." They rode to the barn, where Ethan found the box exactly where Thomas had said. Inside was more money than he had ever seen in one place, enough to buy horses and supplies and still have a stake for when they reached California. There was also a sealed envelope with "For Catherine" written on it in Thomas's careful hand. Catherine opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter and a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She unfolded the cloth to reveal a pair of earrings, delicate gold with small sapphires. "These were my mother's," she said, her voice thick with tears. "He gave me my mother's earrings." She read the letter silently while Ethan packed the money into his saddlebags. When she finished, she folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "What did it say?" Ethan asked gently. "That he loves me. That he knows I am making my own choice, and he respects that even if he does not agree with it. That he hopes I will be happy, and that he will be here if I ever need him." She wiped at her eyes. "And that he expects to meet his grandchildren someday." Ethan pulled her close. "We will make sure he does." They collected Catherine's horse from the stable, a pretty gray mare named Silver that Thomas had given her for her 20th birthday. With Catherine on her own mount, they made better time riding away from the ranch. They crossed the river one final time together, side by side in the starlight, and headed west. They rode through the night, putting miles between themselves and Oatman. When the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Catherine leaned against Ethan's shoulder, exhausted but happy. "We did it," she said. "We are really free." "We are," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And in a few days we will find a preacher and make it official. You will be Catherine Vance, and no one can separate us." They found that preacher in a small town called Prescott 3 days later. It was a simple ceremony in a little church, with the preacher's wife and a passing merchant as witnesses. Catherine wore the same dress she had been wearing when they left, and Ethan wore his cleanest shirt. They spoke their vows with the sun streaming through the windows, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Catherine like his life depended on it. That night, In a small room at the town's only hotel, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Catherine had been nervous at first, but Ethan was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and loved every moment. When they finally came together completely, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting into place. "I love you," Catherine whispered in the darkness afterward, curled against his chest. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love someone." He ran his fingers through her loose hair, marveling that she was finally, truly his. "We are going to have a good life, Catherine. I promise you that. I know we will. As long as we are together, everything else will work itself out." They continued west, taking their time now that the urgency of escape had passed. They followed wagon trails and stagecoach routes, camping under the stars when the weather was clear and seeking shelter in small towns when storms rolled through. Ethan taught Catherine things about tracking and surviving in the wilderness, and she taught him about the stars and the stories her mother had told her as a child. They reached Sacramento in late summer, when the valley was golden with dried grass and the heat was thick and heavy. Ethan presented Thomas's letter to the ranch owner, a weathered man named John Morrison who remembered Thomas from years back. "Vaughn vouches for you. That is good enough for me," Morrison said, looking Ethan over with sharp eyes. "I have been needing someone good with horses. The pay is fair, and there is a small house on the property you and your wife can use. It is not much, but it is solid and clean." The house was indeed small, just 3 rooms, but it had a good roof and a stone fireplace and windows that let in the morning sun. Catherine loved it immediately. They spent their first week scrubbing it clean and making it their own, using some of Thomas's money to buy basic furniture and supplies. Ethan started work with Morrison's horses, and it quickly became clear that his reputation was well-deserved. He had a gift for understanding the animals, for knowing exactly how to approach each individual horse. Word spread, and soon other ranchers were bringing their difficult horses to Morrison's ranch specifically to have Ethan work with them. Catherine found work too, helping Morrison's wife with the household accounts and teaching reading to the children of ranch hands. She had a quick mind for numbers, and a patience with children that made her a natural teacher. The extra money helped them save faster, working toward their dream of owning their own small ranch someday. That first year in California was hard work but happy. They fell into a rhythm, rising early and working through the day, then spending their evenings together in their little house. Catherine learned to cook, sometimes successfully, and sometimes creating disasters that had them both laughing until they cried. Ethan learned to fix things around the house, becoming handy with tools through trial and error. They made friends among the other workers on Morrison's ranch. There was Jack and his wife Sarah, who lived in the next house over and who taught Catherine how to make bread that did not turn into rocks. There was old Miguel, who had been working horses since before Ethan was born and who shared tricks and wisdom over evening meals. There was a whole community of people working toward their own dreams, and Ethan and Catherine fit right in. Catherine wrote to her father regularly, telling him about their life in California. Thomas wrote back, short letters that were gruff but caring, asking questions about their work and their plans. He never said he was proud, but Catherine could read between the lines. When she wrote to tell him she was pregnant the following spring, his response was a single sentence: "Take care of my daughter and my grandchild or answer to me." Ethan had laughed when she read it aloud. "Some things never change." No, but he is trying. That is what matters. The pregnancy was hard on Catherine. She was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, and Ethan worried constantly. Morrison's wife assured him this was normal, that some women just had a harder time with it, but he still hated seeing Catherine suffer. "I am fine," she kept telling him. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am not going to break. I know you are strong, but that does not mean I cannot worry about you. You can worry a little, just not too much. Our baby needs you to stay calm and confident." Their son was born on a cold December morning in 1883, after a labor that lasted 18 hours and left Catherine exhausted but triumphant. Ethan had never been so terrified in his life, pacing outside while Sarah and the midwife attended to Catherine. When he finally heard the baby cry, he felt something in his chest crack wide open. They named him Thomas, after Catherine's father. When they sent the letter announcing his birth, Thomas's response was longer than usual. He wrote that he would come to visit in the spring, that he wanted to meet his grandson and see how they were managing. There was a vulnerability in the letter that Catherine had never seen from her father before, a loneliness that made her heart ache. "We should invite him to stay with us," she said, "even if it is just for a little while." "Our house is pretty small for guests," Ethan pointed out, though he was smiling. "Then we will make it work. He is family, and family makes sacrifices for each other." Thomas arrived in April, riding into Morrison's ranch on the same horse he had ridden in Oatman. He looked older than Ethan remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his hair almost completely gray. But when Catherine placed baby Thomas in his arms, the old man's face transformed with wonder and love. "He has your mother's eyes," Thomas said quietly, studying his grandson's face. "Same shade of blue." "Does he?" Catherine leaned in to look. "I could not tell yet. He is still so small." "He is perfect," Thomas declared. "And you, daughter, you look happy. Tired, but happy." "I am both of those things," Catherine agreed, smiling. Thomas stayed for 2 weeks, sleeping on a bedroll in the main room and spending his days getting to know Ethan and Catherine's life in California. He watched Ethan work with the horses and nodded approvingly at his technique. He walked the property with Morrison and talked ranching and business. He held his grandson for hours at a time, singing old songs Catherine remembered from her childhood. On his last night before returning to Arizona, Thomas sat with Ethan on the porch while Catherine put the baby to sleep inside. "I was wrong about you," the older man said abruptly. Ethan looked at him in surprise. "Sir, I said you had nothing to offer my daughter. I said you could not provide for her, could not make her happy. I was wrong." Thomas gazed out at the darkening sky. "You have given her something I never could. You have given her freedom to choose her own path, to build her own life, and you have worked hard to make sure that life is a good one. That takes a kind of strength I did not recognize at first. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Call me Thomas. We are family now, and family does not stand on ceremony." He pulled out his pipe and tobacco. "I have been thinking about selling the ranch in Oatman. It is too much for one old man, and without Catherine there, it feels empty. I thought I might move out here to California, find a smaller place closer to you and my grandson." Ethan felt his eyebrows rise. "You would leave Arizona? You have been there your whole life." "I have. And maybe that is long enough. Maybe it is time for something new. Catherine is all I have left in this world, and I have already lost too many years being stubborn about who she chose to love. I do not want to miss watching my grandson grow up because I was too proud to admit I might have been wrong." "You were not wrong to want the best for Catherine. You were just wrong about what the best was." Thomas chuckled. "Diplomatic. I can see why she likes you." He lit his pipe and puffed on it thoughtfully. "If I sold the Oatman place, I could buy a good piece of land out here. Maybe go into partnership with you and Catherine, help you get that ranch you have been saving for. Between your skills with horses and my business sense, we could build something solid. something to leave to young Thomas someday. Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The idea of owning his own ranch had always seemed like a distant dream, something that might happen in 10 or 15 years if they saved every penny. But with Thomas as a partner, with his experience and his capital, it could happen much sooner. "I would have to talk to Catherine," he said slowly. "But I think she would be happy to have you closer, and I would be grateful for the partnership." "Good. Then I will start making arrangements when I get back to Oatman. We will see where we stand come fall." They shook hands on it, and Ethan felt the last piece of tension between them finally dissolve. Thomas had crossed a different kind of river that night, leaving behind his anger and his disappointment to meet Ethan halfway. Over the next year, Thomas was true to his word. He sold the ranch in Oatman for a substantial sum and bought a property in the Sacramento Valley, about 50 acres with good water and grazing land. He kept half for himself, building a comfortable house where he could live independently, and put the other half in Catherine and Ethan's names. Together, the three of them built a ranch that quickly gained a reputation for quality horses. Ethan did the training and breaking, using his gentle methods to produce calm, reliable animals. Thomas handled the business side, negotiating prices and managing sales. Catherine kept the books and ran the household, and when young Thomas was old enough, she started teaching reading and writing to the children of their ranch hands, just as she had done at Morrison's place. The ranch prospered. They hired good workers, built solid buildings, and earned respect in the community. Ethan's reputation grew, and soon they were selling horses not just locally but throughout California. Thomas proved to be as shrewd a businessman as ever, but working with family instead of employees softened him in ways Catherine had never seen. He laughed more, worried less, and doted on his grandson with shameless favoritism. 2 years after Thomas moved to California, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara. She had Catherine's dark hair and Ethan's green eyes, and from the moment she could crawl, she was determined to follow her older brother everywhere he went. Thomas had his hands full with both grandchildren now, but he loved every minute of it. He taught young Thomas to ride almost before the boy could walk and told both children stories about the old days in Arizona. He was a different man than he had been in Oatman, warmer and more open, and Catherine told Ethan one night that she had never seen her father so happy. "You gave him his family back," Ethan said, holding her close in their bed. "After your mother died, he had lost that. Now he has it again." "We gave it to him together," Catherine corrected. "Everything good in our life we have built together." They had built something remarkable. By 1890, the Vance Ranch was one of the most successful horse operations in the Sacramento Valley. They had expanded to 100 acres, with a beautiful house that Catherine had designed herself. They employed a dozen ranch hands, all good men who were treated fairly and paid well. Young Thomas, now 7 years old, was already showing his father's gift with horses, and Clara at 5 was fearless on horseback. Catherine ran her informal school 3 days a week now, teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic to 15 children of various ages. She loved the work, loved seeing young minds open up to learning. Ethan had built her a proper schoolhouse on their property, a small building with large windows and a wood stove for winter. Thomas, now in his 60s, had slowed down a bit but was still sharp as a tack when it came to business. He spent his mornings reviewing accounts and his afternoons with his grandchildren, teaching them everything he knew about ranching and life. One evening in late summer, the whole family gathered on the porch of the main house for dinner. Catherine had cooked a feast, and they sat around the long table watching the sun set over the valley. Young Thomas was telling an elaborate story about a horse he had helped his father work with that day, gesturing wildly with his fork. Clara was listening with rapt attention, her eyes wide. And then the horse stopped bucking and just stood there, calm as anything, Thomas finished triumphantly. Just like Papa said he would. That is because your father knows what he is doing, Catherine said, reaching over to ruffle her son's hair. And because you were patient and gentle just like he taught you. Can I work with the horses more often? Thomas asked eagerly. I want to learn everything. You are still young, Ethan said, but he was smiling. There is plenty of time. For now, you help when I ask and keep studying with your mother. But I already know how to read and write and do sums. Why do I need to study more? Because education is never wasted, Catherine said firmly. You might run a ranch someday, but you still need to know history and geography and literature. A well-rounded education makes you a better person, not just a better rancher. Your mother is right, Thomas Sr. added. I never had much formal schooling and I have regretted it my whole life. You have opportunities I never had, boy. Do not waste them. Young Thomas nodded solemnly, properly chastised. Clara, not wanting to be left out of the conversation, piped up with her own question. Mama, can you tell us how you and Papa met? Grandpa says it is a good story. Catherine and Ethan exchanged a glance, both smiling. They had told the children an abbreviated version before, leaving out the more dangerous elements. Your papa was working with a wild horse in Oatman, Catherine began, and I was walking through town with my shopping. I saw him in the corral, being so patient with this frightened animal, and I thought he was the most interesting person I had ever seen. And Mama was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, Ethan added. I could hardly concentrate on the horse after that. But Grandpa did not like Papa at first, right? Young Thomas had heard this part before and found it fascinating. Thomas Sr. chuckled. That is putting it mildly. I thought your father was a no-good drifter who was not good enough for my daughter. I told him if he ever crossed the river onto my property, I would shoot him. But Papa crossed it anyway, Clara said, knowing the story by heart. Every night, Ethan confirmed. I could not stay away from your mother. That river was between us, and her father had promised to kill me if I crossed it. But I crossed it anyway because I loved her too much to let anything keep us apart. And then you ran away to California and got married and lived happily ever after, Clara finished, satisfied with her version of the story. Something like that, Catherine said, laughing. Though it was not quite as simple as a fairy tale, we worked very hard to build this life. We made sacrifices and took risks, but we did it together and that made all the difference. And now we are all together, young Thomas said. You and Papa and me and Clara and Grandpa, we are a family. The best family, Ethan agreed, pulling Catherine close and kissing her temple. The very best. They sat together on that porch as the stars came out, talking and laughing and simply being together. Thomas told stories about the old days, some the children had heard before and some they had not. Catherine talked about plans for the school, about new students who would be joining in the fall. Ethan discussed horses and business and the new breeding program he wanted to start. Later that night, after the children were asleep and Thomas had retired to his own house, Catherine and Ethan sat alone on the porch. She was curled against his side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them content in the quiet darkness. You ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly. Leaving Oatman, leaving everything you knew behind. Not for a single second, Catherine said without hesitation. Everything I need is right here. You, our children, our home. Even my father, happy and settled in a way he never was in Arizona. We have built something beautiful, Ethan. We have built exactly the life I dreamed about all those nights when you came to my window. I still cannot believe your father let us go that night. I was so sure he was going to shoot me. I think part of him wanted to, but he loved me more than he hated the idea of us together. And now look at us. His grandchildren are growing up on a successful ranch, and he is part of that. He made the right choice. He made the hard choice. That is not always the same as the right choice, but in this case, it was both. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the corral, a barn owl calling from the rafters, the distant yip of coyotes on the hills. "I want another baby," Catherine said suddenly. Ethan looked down at her in surprise. "Another one? You want 3 children running around. I want a house full of children. I want noise and chaos and love. I want to fill this beautiful home we have built with a big, happy family." She tilted her head up to look at him. "What do you think?" "I think you are incredible. I think you amaze me every single day. And I think if you want another baby, then we should work on that right away." Catherine laughed and pulled him to his feet, leading him inside to their bedroom. They made love that night with the windows open, letting the cool night air wash over them, moving together with the practiced ease of 2 people who knew each other's bodies intimately. When they finished, breathless and satisfied, Catherine curled against Ethan's chest and sighed contentedly. "I love you," she murmured. "I love the life we have built. I love that we took that risk all those years ago and chose each other over everything else." "Best decision I ever made," Ethan said, kissing her hair. "Crossing that river every night, risking your father's wrath, running away to California with you. All of it was worth it for this. For you." They fell asleep tangled together, dreaming of the future they would continue to build. Their 3rd child, another son they named James, was born the following spring. Then came another daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years after that. The house that had seemed so spacious when they first built, it began to feel properly lived in with 4 children racing through it. Catherine was in her element, managing the controlled chaos with grace and humor. Ethan worked harder than ever to provide for his growing family, but he loved every minute of it. Thomas Sr. had been right about one thing back in Oatman. Love alone did not put food on the table. But love combined with hard work, determination, and the willingness to take risks had built something lasting and valuable. The ranch continued to thrive, and the Vance family became known throughout the valley not just for their horses, but for their integrity and their generosity. When times were hard for their neighbors, Ethan and Catherine were the first to offer help. When young people needed work, they found jobs at the Vance ranch. When children needed education, Catherine taught them for free in her little schoolhouse. They had been given a second chance at happiness when Thomas Vaughn chose to let them go instead of shooting Ethan that night in Oatman. And they never forgot that gift. As the years passed, young Thomas grew into a skilled horseman like his father, eventually taking over much of the training work. Clara developed her grandfather's head for business, managing the ranch accounts with sharp precision. James became the ranch's best rider, fearless and fast. Elizabeth, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a gift for veterinary medicine, learning to treat sick and injured animals with remarkable skill. Thomas Vaughn Sr. lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren grown and married, saw the ranch expand to 300 acres, and saw Ethan and Catherine celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, leaving behind a legacy of redemption and second chances. At his funeral, Catherine spoke about her father's transformation, about the hard man who had learned to soften, the rigid father who had learned to bend. She spoke about his courage in letting her go that night, about his humility in admitting he had been wrong, about his generosity in helping them build their dream. My father taught me that it is never too late to change, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. It is never too late to choose love over pride, family over stubbornness. He gave Ethan and me our chance at happiness, and then he became part of that happiness himself. I will miss him every day, but I will also celebrate the man he became in his final years. That is the father I want to remember. Ethan stood beside her, holding her hand, remembering the man who had threatened to kill him all those years ago. Remembering also the grandfather who had taught his children to ride, the partner who had helped build a thriving ranch, the friend who had played checkers with him on countless evenings and shared stories over whiskey. Life continued at the ranch. Young Thomas and his wife added their own children to the family, and soon grandchildren were running through the same halls where their parents had played. The cycle continued, generations building on what had come before. Ethan and Catherine grew old together, their hair graying and their bodies slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still took evening walks around their property, still sat on the porch watching the sunset, still held hands like young lovers. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they told the story one more time. The story of a river crossed in darkness, of a father's threat and a cowboy's courage, of a love that refused to be denied. "Best decision I ever made," Ethan said, looking at Catherine with eyes that still saw the beautiful young woman who had stolen his heart in Oatman. "Best decision we both made," Catherine corrected, kissing him softly. "We chose each other, and we chose to fight for our love." Everything else came from that. Their children and grandchildren raised glasses in a toast, celebrating not just the anniversary, but the legacy of courage and love that Ethan and Catherine had built. The ranch would continue for generations, a testament to what two people could create when they refused to let anything stand between them and their happiness. Ethan Vance lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully with Catherine holding his hand and whispering that she loved him. Catherine followed him 6 months later, unable to bear being without the man who had crossed a dangerous river every night just to see her smile. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the land they had built together. Their headstone bore a simple inscription: "They chose love." And that choice, made on a dark night beside a rushing river in Arizona all those years ago, had created a legacy that would endure for generations. A legacy of courage, of determination, of the power of love to overcome any obstacle. The story of a father who threatened death, a cowboy who risked it, and a woman who chose her own path despite everything. It was a story worth crossing rivers for. It was a story worth risking everything for. It was the kind of love that changes the world, one life at a time, rippling outward through generations until the original risk becomes a legend. And the legend becomes a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is also the most necessary. In the end, the river that had separated them became just another part of their story, a symbol of the obstacles they had overcome together. Thomas Vaughn's threat became a measure of Ethan's devotion. And the ranch they built became proof that love, combined with hard work and determination, could create something lasting and beautiful. Their great-grandchildren still worked the land 100 years later, still trained horses using Ethan's gentle methods, still told the story of the cowboy who crossed the river every night for love. Some details changed with each telling, embellished or forgotten, but the heart of the story remained true. When you find something worth fighting for, you fight for it with everything you have, and you never, ever give up. That was the lesson Ethan and Catherine had lived, and it was the lesson they left behind. In a world that often seemed determined to keep people apart, they had found a way to come together. In a time when fathers controlled their daughters' futures, Catherine had chosen her own. In a place where a man's worth was measured in land and cattle, Ethan had proven that character and courage mattered more. They had crossed their river, built their life, and loved each other through all the years that followed. And in doing so, they had shown everyone who came after them that the greatest adventures often begin with the simplest decision: to risk everything for love, and to keep choosing love every day for the rest of your life. The ranch still stands, the river still flows, and somewhere in the Arizona desert, there is a place where a young cowboy once stood every night, looking across the water at everything he wanted most in the world, and choosing to cross despite the danger. That choice echoed through the years, through the lives of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a reminder that love is not just a feeling but a series of choices, made over and over again, in big ways and small, until those choices become a life lived fully and completely together. And if you listen carefully on a quiet night, when the river runs swift and strong, you might hear the echo of hoofbeats in the water, the ghost of a cowboy crossing one more time, riding toward love and life and everything that matters most. Because some rivers are meant to be crossed, some risks are meant to be taken, and some loves are meant to last forever. That was the truth Ethan and Catherine discovered on a dark night in 1882, and it remained true through all the years that followed, through every challenge and every triumph, through children born and elders buried, through the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones, through the whole beautiful, difficult, wonderful journey of a life built together. They had crossed their river and never looked back, except to remember how far they had come and how much they had built. And when their time finally came to rest, they rested together, overlooking the land they had claimed and the family they had created, knowing that they had lived well and loved completely. The river flows on, indifferent to human stories, but the story persists anyway, passed down through generations as a reminder that the deepest love often requires the greatest courage, and that courage, once found, can build something that lasts forever. Ethan and Catherine Vance had found their courage on opposite sides of a river in Arizona, and they had used it to build an empire of love in California. Their children inherited that empire, not just the land and the buildings and the thriving business, but the understanding that love is both a gift and a choice, something to be treasured and protected and fought for when necessary. In the end, that was their greatest legacy, not the successful ranch or the family fortune, but the example they set of two people who refused to let anything keep them apart, who worked together to build something beautiful, and who loved each other faithfully and completely until their last breaths. That kind of love was rare and precious, and worth crossing any river for. And Ethan Vance, young cowboy with nothing but a horse and a dream, had proven that night after night, crossing through dangerous water in the darkness, risking his life for stolen moments with the woman he loved. He had crossed that river, and it had made all the difference,